Today's topic is on South Africa after Mandela. There was a lot of talk in the lead up to Mandela's passing that this would be a watershed moment for that country, 20 years after the end of apartheid and just under 20 since first free, fair elections, if we can call them that. And to get a better grasp, I think, of what the future holds for South Africa, we have invited two speakers who have a great deal of knowledge of that country and who both have deep attachment to it that goes back many decades. And the second speaker tonight is Geoffrey Hawker. Geoff's written and been to South Africa. He's done research on South African parliamentary elections, on the ANC, and we've been talking over the last few months about the significance of the passing of Mandela and what it may mean for a country that really has huge challenges and challenges that remain just as pressing today as they were in 1995 when Mandela became first black president of that country.
Thanks very much, Noah. Ken, comrades and friends. Well, it's great to hear Ken talk, and of course the point is that he said nothing I could possibly disagree with. And so, in a sense, I will echo him on a number of points. It's a serious and difficult matter, isn't it? And I just want to make some reasons for saying why, for us in Australia on the left, the whole situation in South Africa is such a significant one. And why we've got a right in Australia to be extremely concerned about what is happening, and while still we can perhaps have some influence on the direction of politics in that country. It is the 14th of August 2014. We're just 2 days short of the second anniversary of the Marikana massacre, when on a single day, Ken's reminded us, I don't think many of us need reminding, but let's just dwell on it for a moment, 34 miners were shot dead by the police. Over the period of days before that, a further 10 people died. That was the most severe massacre, it's not an incident, it's a massacre in South Africa since the Sharpeville massacre of 1960, which there'd be more than one person in this room would remember that, and it may have brought them into politics in Australia, that massacre. And I don't want to make any facile comparisons. I'm going to leave it. We all know about it. There's a commission of inquiry looking at it. Cyril Ramaphosa, the Deputy President, is well in the frame. And we will see what turns out, and I will return to Cyril Ramaphosa in just a few moments. Now, I want to try to draw something positive out of it, and I can. We remember 1994, and who can doubt that the changes that happened then to the regime were a great advance in this world of ours. The apartheid regime fell. It left so much behind it, which still is a weight on South Africa. But the apartheid regime did fall. We must never forget that and never forget to celebrate it. It was not the revolution of 1917 in Russia. It was the sweeping away of a racist regime, and I think I have to say, I think it's true, any of us that go to South Africa or know about it, all of the issues and difficulties notwithstanding, by and large, formal racism has been swept away. It is a different country. It is. I was going to try to talk up going beyond that great change, which is so important to the world, that a racist regime can be opposed and overcome. To try to talk up the results since in housing and water supply, and I could to some degree, but having, we've heard what Ken has said quite accurately and truthfully, and I would be making some fairly hesitant remarks about how the last 20 years have delivered material reforms, apart from the great reforms of race relations, if I can put it that way. But I want to just try to give a slightly positive note also from what you might think is an unexpected and even half a jokey angle, but it's not really. My purpose is serious. To say what happened in South Africa in 1994, the events leading to it and since, had their impact on our society. We're joined to South Africa. We have a relationship with South Africa. It's very important in Australian history. It's just not what we can do for South Africa, it's what South Africa has done for us. In my opinion, our growing knowledge of the tragedy and the cruelties of the apartheid regime was one way in which this country grew to maturity. A business not yet finished, but to some extent, our knowledge, the youth of the time especially, and the trade unions, that saw what was happening in South Africa in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s and the 80s, that to some degree de-racialised this society. It enabled us to grow up. It enabled people to protest. It enabled us to oppose the racist state governments in particular in Australia. And I could say we had a great period of bipartisan movement between the Whitlam and the Fraser governments around South Africa. Fraser here a few weeks ago. I find myself astounded, but we have to call it as we see it. And if I can put it this way, we all love Nelson Mandela. Everyone wants a piece of him. Everyone throughout the world admires and respects him, although I'm going to say a few things in a moment. And let me just put it in, you know, this is meant to be slightly jokey, but I don't want us to do a Bob Hawke. When Bob Hawke in his memoirs, I hope I don't take you by surprise by recalling this other Australian, I quote, "Nelson Mandela's generosity of spirit was quickly evident," this is during his visit to Australia in '91, "as we settled down in my office. He," Nelson said, "I want you to know, Bob, that I'm here today at this time because of you." He thanked me for my leadership and initiatives in Choggin, particularly at the Vancouver meeting. Now, I won't go on, it's well known, it's all rubbish and nonsense. That's Hawke retailing what Mandela said. Mandela was too polite to correct him. Though if you read Long Work to Freedom, you won't notice a reference to Bob Hawke. You will, and Alex Mitchell, the well-known Sydney journalist, has only recently documented all this, you will notice that Mandela did make an early call to the Canadian Prime Minister and visited Canada before he came to Australia, and he did testify to Canada's influence rather than Australia's. Now, I'm just saying that, and I don't want to spend too long about it, because of course people claim Mandela to get something from him. We can do better than that. We need to understand the impact of that man and the movement and his comrades on Australia and how positive that was, how much we learned from him. But we don't have to falsely claim him in that sort of a way. I'd rather remember people like Eddie Fundi, the ANC representative in this country from 1983 to 1991 in those years, who worked so tirelessly around Australian society, talking to Liberal and Labor and NGOs and anyone he could talk to about what was going on in South Africa, and who helped to radicalise this country and to turn people away from the racism that characterised Australia towards support of South Africa, and also, though it's a more painful thing to say, of Zimbabwe. So anyway, moving on. The regime changed in 1994, but it was not a revolution of socio-economic character. The ANC, the dominant party, yes, winning the election as it has ever times since, came to a country that was looted of its resources. It came in the famous so-called compromise of '94 into a political change that left the structures of government largely intact. The bloated white bureaucracy on the large salaries, the police and the security forces still in place. Yes, there was constitutional change. Yes, there was change in political personnel. Yes, it was black majority rule. But so much of the structure of the society remained intact. That was the deal that was done in the constitutional conventions. Constitutional freedom, socio-economic ownership remained with capital. Nothing changed. We knew that. Mandela knew that. I think hard choices were made. Could South Africa have gone in '94 in a revolutionary direction? I think some of us half thought so at the time, but it was not on the cards. It was not what the ANC was negotiating at the time. Could it have gone in a much more redistributive direction than it did? Yes, in the early years there was that attempt with the Reconstruction and Development Program, the RDP, quickly stifled, turning to gear to the neo-liberal set of policies that have characterised the country since. If we have to date it, we'd say from as quickly as, if I said 96, it's probably too late. It was incipiently there at the moment of transition. Now, we know broadly where that has taken us. I mean, there's no time for lots of figures, but we could quote the government's own recent figures. Just do this quickly, a headline figure. The share of national income going to profits between 94 and 09 increases from 40 to 45%. The share going to wages declines from 50 to 45%. Now, we can go to many, many more. They're government figures, they're official, we can have some scepticism, but they are government figures and they're showing that capital is taking more. Who could doubt that? If we look at the Gini coefficient as it's measured in South Africa, we see not growing equality, we see growing inequality. It's a terrible thing to say, but it's true. And if we say the BRICS, even to speak of South Africa as in the BRICS puts us in the whole frame of the neoliberal project. That's where the country under its current political leadership is. Of course it is. Everyone knows that. Now, this is something that I think we have to say on the evidence Nelson Mandela fully knew, and here I'll try to say he fully regretted. He's presented in a certain way in the West. He's presented as the great national reconciler, which he was. He's presented as the man that gave the legitimacy to the liberal term. That's much less clearly established. His long walk to freedom was jointly authored. Of course, his co-author was Richard Stengel, the very clever executive editor of Time magazine. And recent work done on the original Mandela diaries and the manuscripts that survive show a rather harder Mandela than Long Walk to Freedom gives us. A Mandela who was on the central executive of the Communist Party for some years, though that was later denied, and whose espousal of the armed struggle came much earlier than that book now says, or than is recognised in the West, where his image is softened and he's downplayed as a revolutionary leader. He becomes, yes, a non-racist reconciler, but not a revolutionary. And his last significant speech, he only served one term as president. Of course, he was elderly. He served one term, and the speech he made at the 97 Party Congress at Mafeking, when, of course, he handed over the leadership of the party to Thabo Mbeki, thus ensuring Mbeki would 2 years later at the election ascend to the state presidency. Let's just remember that as I come to Ramaphosa in one moment. Then Mandela said those things that The Economist and The Independent and all the lovely liberal papers of the West called antiquated Marxist gibberish. They might have been overstating it, but at that stage Mandela did unleash in a 5-hour speech his feeling that he knew he was leaving office and handing over to Mbeki, and the turn that might then be decisively taken, as was the liberal turn. He spoke for 5 hours. It's expunged from the ANC website now. It's been reduced to a 2-page document, but the original can still be found. He said many things. He criticised students in higher education driven by self-serving anarchist activism. He talked, though, about the need for the de-racialisation of productive property and the institution of a system of social accountability of capital through the establishment by the state of regulatory mechanisms to counteract the inequalities generated by globalisation. This was in a long and angry speech that was received with great hostility in the West. It shows a frustrated Mandela leaving office with a sense of lack of achievement, lack of basic fundamental change in South African society. So I hope I'm not taking from his legacy, but rather adding to it. And I think much about him needs to be rewritten and re-understood. The Economist at that time got it entirely wrong, I might say. It spoke of the handover. It referred to Zuma, the current president. Mr. Zuma is an old friend of Thabo Mbeki, who was stepping up to the plate. But the mild Mr. Zuma presents no threat to Mr. Mbeki. How wrong can that be? Because of course it was Zuma that took Mbeki down and succeeded in his place. But how right the Economist was to think that neither Mbeki nor Zuma were a challenge to the liberal order then intensifying in South Africa. So there has been continuity, and now I have to say we have the further continuity with Cyril Ramaphosa. Cyril Ramaphosa is a man in his early 60s. He has many years to go. Not only that, but he's in a position where, let us be clear, he will succeed to the presidency of the nation of South Africa. And he will be there until the year 2029. Let us be totally clear about that. Let there be no ambiguity about that. Unless there is a change within the ANC, unless the ANC loses its hegemony, unless it splits, the ANC, not a revolutionary party, but a party on the Leninist mould, with a tradition of collective responsibility, it will ensure, as it always has since its foundation, the orderly succession to office of its president, its deputy president, and its secretary general. That is the way it works. It plans for succession most rigorously and carefully. It has always done so. At the 1997 Congress, Nelson Mandela stepped down as president of the party. He remained president of the country for 2 further years. He was succeeded as president of the party by Thabo Mbeki, who inevitably, in the ANC tradition, was number 1 on the election ticket in '99 and was re-elected in '04 before falling foul of Zuma. Cyril Ramaphosa, who was Secretary General of the party, and stepped back from that to enter business and to become one of the richest men, not just in South Africa, but all the world. I mean, I mustn't overstate it, we have some around here, but he's worth nearly $1 billion US, according to Forbes, and on this case I'll take the capitalist count because I think they're interested in these things. Ramaphosa stepped back into business, has made himself rich and has re-entered the world of politics and has become deputy leader of the party, deputy president of the country, and when Zuma goes, as he must in 2019, Ramaphosa, unless something untoward, something that's never happened in the history of the ANC happens, he will become president and he will serve the mandatory limit of 2 terms, taking him to 2029. And he will be, by the time he ends his presidency in 2029, he will be in his late 70s, the same age, almost within a month, as Zuma will also be. They are 10 years apart. Ramaphosa is in the line of direct succession in the way the ANC works things. And unless something happens, we can look forward to an intensifying of what we have seen since '94, which I think has been between us, particularly by the detailed remarks Ken has made. We can see the continuation of the Liberal project, the extraction of value by capital, the continued agonisingly slow process of betterment, if it is that, for the mass of South Africans. We will see a betrayal of the change of '94. And I can only say, what can I say? What can I say? We do know that the ANC is leeching support. We do know that breakaway movements have happened. On the one hand, Cope a few years ago with, as it were, the elders to the right, the Lakotas and the like of the party. More recently, the Malemas, apparently of the left. We've seen the vote. Everyone says, oh, next time the ANC will go down. It never quite happens, but it did decline in gross terms from 65.9 to 62.2 earlier this year. That's, in the way of these things, a significant change. If that continues to go and other splits are possible, then there are changes ahead. I totally concur. I can only say I've resisted this thought at least since 1994, that the alliance, the tripartite alliance of the COSATU with the Communist Party within the ANC, joined to the ANC, must surely give a stability and a progressive force to South African politics. It's impossible for me to think that now. I can only see the struggles that are happening all over the ground in South Africa and must surely lead to the disintegration of ANC hegemony. And the issue is what is to be reconstructed in that society in its place. And can we recapture the moment, the brief 2 years when there were the possibilities in Mandela's very early years, before in effect Mbeki took over the domestic leadership of the party, even before he descended to formal office. Can we recapture that period when redistribution was discussed in a serious fashion and policies were developed against political will to make that happen? It seems to me we're 20 years on from the great shift that has not delivered the socio-economic changes that the people of South Africa deserve. And we have to revisit that time. And that would be, to my mind, where Mandela's best legacy truly lies.